Good afternoon and welcome to Achates Live on Tuesday, the 8th of December, for our final session of the year, Strengthening Foundations, Building Income from Trusts After COVID-19. I'm Caroline McCormick and I'm the Director of Achates Philanthropy, and it's my pleasure to be your host this afternoon. As you know, Achates Philanthropy is a strategy and fundraising consultancy company which is dedicated to the cultural sector. It's been 10 months since we moved Achates Live from an in-person monthly workshop at London's Old Vic Theatre to online workshops, and amazingly we've broadcast 25 sessions since. And whilst that period has been incredibly difficult for us all, I do want to say a huge thank you as we approach the festive season to all of you for sharing your stories and experiences as panelists and participants, and also to the Achates team for their incredible hard work and brilliance. We hope it's been useful and helped to create a sense of community for us all. And it's not over just yet, because today we have three more fantastic panelists who have had great success at this really challenging time and are going to be talking about strengthening foundations, building income from trusts after COVID-19. The session is broadcast live and then available on YouTube, and all information is accurate at the point of broadcast but may change. And our guests today are, perhaps you can all say hello as I introduce you, Bhavisha Kukadia Moran, who is Trusts and Foundation Manager at Opera North. Hello, Bhavisha. Lovely to have you with us.
Hello, Caroline. Hello, everybody.
And then we have Michaela Clayton, who's Development Manager at Cardboard Citizens. Hi, Michaela.
Hey, everyone.
Great to have you with us as well. And finally, Emily Lloyd, who's Development Manager at City of London Symphonia. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Great to have all three of you with us, but I'm also delighted to say that today's session is being led by our fantastic Head of Trusts, Tash Blore. Now, Tash will be leaving us in the new year after 4 years. We will so miss you, Tash, but for now, over to you for today's session. Thanks, Tash.
Thanks, Caroline. And welcome, everybody, to the final Achates Philanthropy of 2020. We made it. As Caroline said, I'm Tash Blore, Head of Trusts, and under today's theme of strengthening foundations, we're going to be talking about the way COVID-19 has impacted on grant-making trusts, what that means for the future, and how the sector can respond to these shifts to rebuild trust income in the year ahead. In so many ways, it now feels as if we're beginning to emerge from the worst of the crisis. Trust funders are increasingly transitioning from emergency responses to strategic recovery plans. Funds such as the Garfield Weston Fund, Recovery Fund, have supported organisations to look ahead to their next 12 months and put the learning that they've gained over this last 9 months into practice. We've also seen large funders adapt their processes and create new funds, such as the Jerwood Live Work Fund, which has been delivered by, I think, a really exciting partnership of Jerwood, the Wolfson Foundation, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and the Limbury Trust. Alongside new funds, many funders that have paused their grant making are now beginning to reopen, allowing us to chart a clearer course through the months to come. With reopening has come new strategic focuses. We've seen many of the bellwether trusts, such as Esme and Paul Hamlin Foundation, as well as statutory funders like the National Lottery Community Fund, refocus their cultural work on key priorities that we're going to dig into today. There has also been an emphasis on both supporting and trialling new approaches, whether through innovative cross-sector partnerships, resource sharing, socially informed methodologies, or new technologies that will increase our reach and impact. However, I think it's right we're pragmatic and that we situate these changes within a time of ongoing challenge. Many trusts spent their reserves or some of their reserves or dipped into endowments in order to free up emergency funds, meaning their resources will be impacted for years to come. What's more, there is increased competition for these reduced pots of money. I'm sure many of us were a little taken aback to see the Western Culture Fund received applications totaling 128 million for a pot of 25 million. So with this in mind, there's never been a greater need to think about how we're responding to these new priorities and reshaping our own strategies to give ourselves the best chances of success. To discuss this new landscape, I'm really delighted to bring in our panelists, Bavisha, Michaela, and Emily. Could I start by asking you all to briefly introduce your organisations and give us a sense of where you are now and what you've been doing to plan and look forward? As Caroline says, I know you've all been quite successful within this difficult landscape. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that and also what the next year of your trust fundraising looks like. Shall we start with Bavisha, then Emily and Michaela?
So I'm from Opera North, which is one of Europe's leading arts organisations, and we take music and opera across the north of England. And under normal circumstances, we would be touring our operas to Leeds, Newcastle, Manchester, Hull, Nottingham and Kirklees. And we deliver music education to 1,800 young people a week and run activities for all ages, from early year settings to care homes. Since the start of the pandemic, we've refocused our work to centre around digital and outdoor engagement. So things like our As You Are Sound Walk, that's launching this week in Leeds. And the other thing that we've also done is recently launched our online platform to stream the shows that we had planned for our autumn season. Now we can't perform them as we're in Tier 3. So Saturday is going to be the first full-length and full-scale opera that we have streamed since the first lockdown, and that's going to be Beethoven's Fidelio, so please do join us. Our education outreach work is also taking place online, and it's been a real catalyst for us to innovate as an organisation. So one of the things that we're doing, which we found has been really successful, is our festive edition of our Pay As You Feel Couch to Chorus online choir. And it's been amazing to see that this time round we've got over 1,000 participants, and it's pay as you feel, and so far donations are in excess of £28,000. So it's really chimed with our audience and brought new people to us that we might not have reached otherwise. With our trust fundraising, we're just taking a moment of very slight pause as we're delving really deep into our database and building a realistic pipeline for the next 12 to 24 months. So through the immediate COVID period, we kind of stopped fundraising for projects because obviously our projects weren't running, and we kind of looked at supporting our internal teams to deliver what they could during that time. So much of this activity was essential outreach and education, for which we were in multi-year funding. And this meant that we had to think really carefully about expenditure and keeping really strong links, communicating with relationship managers at trusts, etc. And we've been able to work flexibly and extend some of these grants to use when we can resume activity. So that's really been an exercise in looking forward past this COVID period and how we can continue to have the same impact after the pandemic, although the physical activity might look a little bit different. So in terms of planning, we're actively conversing with our regular givers to get a better understanding of their priorities and how they match with ours. And as I mentioned, the digital work that everybody's now doing, we're also looking to tie our activity together into strands, and our approach is to work with trust across strands rather than individual activities which still might be subject to change.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think that emphasis on strands and pulling out the thematic focuses of your work is such a fantastic way of approaching things when what the material delivery is very subject to change, but having that core focus on what you do and who it's for sounds fantastic. Thank you. Emily, should we come to you now?
Yes, sorry, I was writing down emphasis on strands because that's a very good phrase. So I am from City of London Symphonia. We are an orchestra who has a, in my very biased opinion, excellent participation program. And we do a lot of work in healthcare settings, so hospices. We work with children's hospital schools and adolescent psychiatric hospital school, as well as community groups. So obviously when lockdown happened, working in healthcare, we couldn't immediately switch to digital with a lot of our participation groups because they were very under-resourced with staff. So instead we transformed one of our community concert series, Comfortable Classical, into Comfortable Classical at Home. So our musicians did solo concerts from their living rooms or gardens that were live streamed twice a week. And we kept those interactive so that people could do Facebook comments, and the musicians could respond to them, and it kept a lot of the spirit of our live concerts without necessarily having that in-person interaction. And now we've started up some digital programs, which is great. And meanwhile, in the office, we are writing our 5-year strategy, which is a really fun thing to do when you don't know what's happening in 5 days' time. But it's been a really good opportunity to sort of step back from the crisis mode that we have been in for 6 straight months, and actually look forward. As with everyone else, we have been really fortunate over the last few months to get support from a lot of people, which is great, but we need to figure out where to go from here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily. And I think that 5-year strategy, whilst I'm sure a mammoth task that you deserve a long rest after, is an amazing exercise in, as you say, sort of lifting our heads up and thinking beyond just crisis. And I know that's been very, very hard for so many of us for a while, but what an incredibly valuable exercise to have done. Michaela, should we come to you last?
Hello. I work at Cardboard Citizens. So we're a theatre company who primarily work with individuals with experience of homelessness or individuals at risk of homelessness. And we have 2 sort of strands of work. We've got a professional theatre work that does go on tour and is sort of more aimed at changing society's perception around homelessness. And then we work with our members who are participants of our almost education program, but almost like just a community that we've created. So when COVID hit for us, as you're aware, the homelessness risk community is already a very vulnerable community, and we're even more vulnerable with the isolation of day centres closing. So we very much kicked straight into trying to figure out a support offer. And that was very interesting because in some ways we started working in some of the hotels where there were housing rough sleepers. And that was really interesting. So we've been doing a lot more partnership working. Fundraising wise, we also had a very interesting thing where the director of development and our corporate events manager decided to leave the company just before, and we went immediately on a recruitment freeze. So there has actually only been me in the whole of fundraising for the last 6 months, but I now have a colleague, which is lovely. But I think that sort of, a lot changed strategically. We were well placed for a lot of grants that were coming up for offering, for support for vulnerable people. So we're very much busy on the really busy applying for trusts and trying to look after our corporates and individuals. But that sort of chaos really did cause a strategic change. It caused our trustees to sort of stand by looking at the strategy behind how we fundraise, and even also the strategies behind sort of how we deliver in the audiences we want to engage. And through all that, we are developing a theory of change and a new case for support. So going forward, I'm so much more confident with what we're putting out there now than I think we were. And this year, as far as I remember, we raised our income for the year in I think September, and I think September, October time we'd raised the income for the year, which I don't think we've ever done before in my time at SITS, which was absolutely exceptional. And part of that was changing a lot of our grants to core and reducing what we were aimed to raise, but also just the amount of support we already had from current trusts and individuals, and that has put us in such a unique position to be able to concentrate on looking towards the future and start getting those strategies. I'm very jealous of this 5-year strategy that Emily has written and got in place, and I'd love to be able to start on something like that for Cardboard Citizens.
Thank you so much. And congratulations. It sounds like you singularly for a little while have been working incredibly hard on this, but I think amazing that in this period of time, not only has it been a moment to refine theories of change and logic models, but that also you've had that trustee level support, because I think that is so vital. not only when you're working alone, but to have an understanding of how vital that is to the future of the organisation from the trustees. So brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. So let's get into some questions. First thing I wanted us to think about was some key strategic, which key strategic changes you've identified with trusts, both in terms of your current supporters, but also maybe prospects and the wider landscape. I mean, I think trends itself is quite an interesting question because it suggests that these things might come and go, when in reality, there might be some things that maybe we all hope are longer term changes for the better. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about what you've been finding out. Let's come back to you, Bhavisha, to begin with.
So from our conversations with Trust, we found that many are opening up a dialogue rather than closing off and reducing their giving. I know that did happen at the start of the first lockdown. But we found that, yes, some smaller trusts with limited funds, of course, having to make really difficult decisions. But on the whole, it seems like trusts are rethinking how they work with their grantees, and it's definitely becoming more of an open dialogue process, which I think is really positive. I suppose that's just maybe one of the things that trusts have wanted to do, and now, like many of us, have pushed into actually taking a step towards the strategies that we hope to achieve in the future, and we're just doing it now. One positive thing I have noticed that it doesn't seem to be a reduction in giving to the arts. So for foundations with a mixed portfolio of giving, the arts doesn't seem to have disappeared or taken too much of a backseat. So it feels really good that the arts are being fully recognised, because I think the impact of that lack of participation and being part of culture and the social good that our arts organisations are achieving is duly being recognised.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And that there was perhaps an initial bit of anxiety that as arts and cultural organisations that we might be behind other emergency funds or sort of medical causes. But I think, if anything, it's probably testament to the job everyone's been doing across the sector and making the case for our impact. And it's been so clear. So yeah, I think that's really fortifying and encouraging. Emily, what are your thoughts on trends, changes, things that you've been finding out?
I am sincerely hoping that this trend to core funding stays. I think it's something that the sector internationally has been asking for the entire not-for-profit sector has been very focused on. It would be great if funders would trust us to spend the money where it needs to go for our organisation. And a lot of people just immediately turned around in March and said, that's fine, do what you need to do, we support your organisation. So that's been great, and it would be incredibly helpful for everyone, I think, if we could keep going with that. I think the way that people have been asking us to demonstrate our social impact is great, because it's something that, even if you know that your organization's doing it, being able to articulate it helps in so many different areas as well. It helps with just raising the profile of the organization, being able to talk to individual donors. So while that was initially perhaps a scramble to pull together a succinct elevator pitch for it, I think it in the long term is going to be really helpful. Yeah,
absolutely, I agree. And I think being able to talk about impact across the organization and to different funders, as you say, individuals, corporates, is so pivotal. I think we'll come into that a little bit more later, actually, when I'm going to ask you all about cases for support and things like that. But I thought your comments on the changes in how the funders were operating is really fascinating, because I think for a long time we've experienced, as trust fundraisers, we've experienced some of those sort of challenges to getting quick responses, being able to make our applications in a more straightforward way. And it felt like overnight in emergency responses that really shifted. And I think that that has been really fascinating, because it marks a step change. And I don't know if that step change is one that continues post-crisis, if we can have a sort of post-COVID landscape. But are there things from that? I'm just wondering if there are things from that we're going to see carried forward. Do you think there might be? Emily, am I going to ask you? think you might have just frozen there.
I did, yes. That was
Yes,
great.
you did.
My internet to die. Sorry, I live with two people who are also teaching online, so it's a gamble who gets the best connection. What was the question? Whether things are going to...
My question was, do we think that there are shifts that have happened as a result of things like the London Funders Coalition or new ways of delivering emergency responses that we hang on to?
I hope so.
Which would you like? Which would you keep?
I think the London Funders thing, I don't know if that would work outside of the emergency landscape, but that was definitely an incredible way to just... It was such a straightforward process to say, and it was so... Having such explicit guidelines of, you know, we knew we couldn't go for particular rounds because we're not doing frontline work. I think sometimes you can get a bit caught up in a trust saying they'll fund any number of things and you're not quite sure if it's going to be right for you. So having such a clear instruction was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I strongly suspect that we will see trusts drilling down a bit more into those areas of focus as we move out of this, because I think they're going to have to. Michaela, can I get your thoughts on trends, things that you've been finding out?
Yeah, I think adding on to what you've said, I do think there's more conversations happening. I feel like trusts are more open. You know, Esme, Limbury, Foyle have been like, they've all been speaking on online events and, you know, talking about like how they see their strategies moving forward. And I think that's very exciting, seeing them actually really opening up. And it isn't just, you know, the leaders, like other trusts are opening up too, like Closed Foundations with the Julian Hans Rosing Trust open up this year. And they've only been to private people before. So it's really exciting how the fundraising world is definitely becoming, I'd say, more accessible. You know, you saying about the online process for applying is far more accessible now than it has been in the past, which I find really fun. They're also listening to what we need, I think is important. I feel like this year was more about what do you need rather than us looking at a bunch of guidelines and being like, oh, I think we matched. We can just put that a lot in the application form and you know, we kind of do that. And also, I do think there's an upcoming trend of a movement towards co-creation and community-led. And although, so co-creation is a cooperative process in which people with diverse experiences, skills and knowledge will like come together. And that's something we've been looking at, especially with the people we work with, to try and forefront that in applications. And I think that's, especially, I remember I was watching a talk and Esme actually said that that's sort of the things they're looking for. And so that's, yeah, I think that's a big trend that's coming up, and it's a very interesting one because I think it's almost going further than when culture, we had to show value in what we do. Now it's more about showing the voice of the people we do this for in what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's such a good point. I think that community-led focus could be situated alongside maybe 2 or 3 other really key headline things that are, I think, across all trusts, regardless of their priorities, whether it's cultural or social and more broadly, are focusing on now and will be. And I think it's that community-led focus where people's voice is really in project design and delivery. I think it's equity and justice, whether that's racial, social, gender-based. And I think it's sustainability and the climate crisis, really, isn't it? That these are the things that all of the funders that are reshaping or refocusing their priorities are pushing to the fore. And I think that's fantastic. And yeah, I completely agree with you that it's wonderful to be in sort of much more dialogue with trusts now than perhaps we've had the opportunity to be before, and that there seems to be a move there. And I think that's reflected in the Association of Charitable Foundations, Stronger Foundations reporting that's, I think, just come out, that is about increasing their transparency, increasing their conversation with funders, with grant recipients, and also just a sense of accountability there, which I think is a really positive move actually for the sector. Okay, so thank you for telling me all about your sort of trend forecasts. I wonder now if we could think a little bit about some of the key challenges and what they might be, specifically for your organisations, but maybe with existing funders. Michaela, let's come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, challenges. So I think almost following on from sort of the opening up of the trust sector, I think there may be difficulties with some of the big funders with co-creation looking to fund smaller groups. So they may actually be moving away from some of the larger arts organisations, and instead of giving a large arts organisation who possibly do have trust and foundation supporters and income coming in from other sources, they may choose to support smaller charities. So although that's really great for some things, that might be a challenge for some charities coming forward. And I do think also this cultural sector demonstrating value things being revisited, and we're really having to show that again. And, you know, I do think it's important to show value in your work, but it always makes me a little nervous at the idea where some, you know, I always talk to Caroline about this, about the arts, and, you know, the arts are always funded by the government, and we in the past, and we didn't have to show this intrinsic value. And, you know, it's just the well-being should be enough, but I do worry that there'll be a movement to really having to show that. And I worry for the smaller organisations who may not have the resources to be able to show that in an application, and to really, and I think some of that can be seen with the Cultural Recovery Fund, has some organisations made, you know, got great big grants, but there were a lot of people who didn't get grants who maybe just didn't have the resources to put into the application in the first place, or couldn't show how vital they were in the bigger picture. And I think also a lot of the grants at the moment have been very much about focus on reopening, and there has been very little, I found, strategic grants going forward. So everything needs to be spent by April. And I found that very stressful, because we're getting to a point where it's been, you know, easy to fund this year, but I'm, you know, starting to be nervous about next year. Like, are we now going to have a fund gap where, you know, all the big grantors were like, well, we gave all our money out last year to make sure organisation didn't fall, and I can't believe, you know, we're carrying those issues forward. Like, this is going to be a 2-3 year thing, recovering from this. And are we going to continue to be supported?
Yeah. Bhavisha, do you think, like Michaela, that we are potentially getting ourselves, well, not we, but that we're going to have to respond really clearly with our social impact in order to ensure that we're not just pushed into making quite limited arguments around maybe our financial impact as organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as the fundraising sector for the arts in particular, you know, our case for support have been evolving for the last sort of 20 years. You know, there was all of that talk sort of 15 years ago about that intrinsic value of the arts, and then that's moved to you know, take us really seriously, because we do operate like businesses. We want to be seen on an even footing with business, and then that's kind of, then we moved into saying, oh, but remember, we are charities, and having to, you know, remind people that we're also charities. We spent so long talking about how our business is, and all of that has been exhausting, I think, for charities to really think about where we need to pitch ourselves, without also, you know, working with trusts that often, for many of the smaller and mid-sized trusts, haven't changed their style of giving for many years, and now all of a sudden we're all having to make really massive changes, and for some of those trusts those changes are just as drastic, and perhaps for trustees that might have sat on boards for trusts for decades, it's not something that they might have done before. Because I know you know, some trusts like the Cadburys have really stayed strong with their original mission, and lots of trusts that were set up in memory of certain individuals are often still sticking to the original sort of themes and aims for those charities. And I think that thing around us evolving, we need to do it together. It's going to be really hard also for trusts to feel that they still have a connection with us if our world and our work is changing so quickly. I feel like we need to bring trusts along with us, rather than us constantly looking to trusts as a sort of agenda setters, because actually they're not agenda setters in that way anymore. We're not talking about, you know, the philanthropic trusts of the early 19th century. we really need to open up that dialogue. And like Michaela mentioned earlier, they've been asking us, what do we need? And we equally need to do the same, I think, with trusts.
I think that's such a fantastic point. And I think that was something that was really reflected in the Institute of Fundraising Trust funders webcast recently, where major funders are saying the same thing as you, that this is about partnership and that we need to be working together in a way that disrupts, where possible, those previous power structures of they are grant maker and they set the agenda entirely, when in reality, as you say, we're all in flux and we're all navigating those challenges together. And I mean, I suppose a big part of that, or what maybe I should ask you sort of strategically, is that around communication? Is that around ensuring that the voices of the people that you work with, that our audiences and beneficiaries, are really being heard as well?
Yes, I think it's both of those. And, you know, it's around, you know, in the same way that Paul Hammond and Nesri Fairburn, they are repositioning to really tackle the challenges of today. And we also need to do that. I think we need to show in our work that it's relevant, not because we need to say, oh, it's got, you know, pound for pound economic clout and things like that. Actually, we need to be saying the challenges that society are facing, we are meeting through our work in this way, and we want to join you in fighting the climate emergency or fighting inequality in society, because this is our way of doing that. And I think if we are speaking along those terms, we are going to be aligned. And yes, that might make it slightly more difficult when we get into the nitty gritty of how that project delivery will take place. But ultimately, because things are changing all the time, I think it's going to be around creating those mutual relationships with the trust that are based on trust. Like Emily mentioned earlier, it's going to be about organisations feeling like they've got a relationship where it's less of a benevolent kind of, we're going to give you this exact money because we want to have all your receipts and check that you've done what we said. It's going to be, actually, we really believe that you guys are going to deliver on creating change.
Amazing, yeah. And I think there's a question in there about how we're talking about impact, but before we get to that, I want to bring you in, Emily, and see whether you share Michaela and Bhavisha's thoughts on those challenges, or any other ones.
I 100% share their thoughts. I don't actually know if I have anything to add. We've had a similar thing where we're starting work in the social prescribing field, which is still reasonably new, and it's just that fear that the arts are going to be suddenly seen as, well, you need to be proving exactly the clinical effectiveness of your work before you can get any funding. When, you know, we've all been inside all year. If anyone got through that without Netflix and Spotify and books, then I'm going to be very surprised if the arts didn't impact their mental health in a positive way this year. So I, of course, I'm 100% behind you know, having social impact and being able to show that you're improving lives with art in whatever way, but at the same time, it's the values there, so trust us to an extent.
Absolutely. I think this is a good moment for us to think a bit more about how those changes and maybe those challenges are impacting how we are framing our case for support, in terms of how we're bringing that impact in, how we're talking about our work. I saw Safina from the John Ellerman Foundation speaking on a Zoom, and she distilled this really beautifully, where she said, we want to know, like, what matters, and what matters to you, and what matters to the people that you work with. And I wonder if there are ways now that we, or that you guys, are reflecting that differently, or how your cases for support have changed. Bhavisha, should we come back to you to begin with?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, looking at our cases for support, we're looking along strands, and also around the fact that for us, I've kind of noticed that the public's attitude towards charity has kind of changed a little bit. So we've had these huge drives with NHS and Captain Tom. People have really been switched on, not only towards giving, but I think valuing the little guy, and valuing sort of smaller initiatives and the everyday sort of heroes in society. And I feel like arts organisations that are working with their communities absolutely fit into that. So I feel that in terms of our cases for support, it's going to be hard to do, because often organisations like Opera North and many others, we in the arts, we lead with our sort of successes. We want to go in there really strong, show how much we've achieved, all of the people that we've engaged and the huge impact. But actually, amongst that, we actually have come through a crisis. We don't tend to speak about our vulnerabilities in the same way that other third sector organisations feel confident in doing. So I think some of that might have to form a little part of cases for support, because these cases, they're not just going to major philanthropists. We are absolutely talking to our audiences on every single level, and we look at our, the trustees of trusts as audience members of anybody that you could meet on the street, and therefore it's about connecting who we are as an organisation, which is absolutely not faceless, and kind of having that human contact with people in organisations and people out in society and individual audiences, because we've all kind of felt a little bit like a faceless mass while we've been all locked down. We're all behind screens, we're all kind of thinking about crowds and people and thinking, oh, well, I'm a single person who feels a very particular way about things, or I've been able to actually delve down and find art that really speaks to me while I've been isolated. And I think that as organisations, we need to really kind of pick up on that and speak to individuals rather than blanket audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's something really fascinating in thinking about vulnerabilities, and maybe also where that fits within how we think about our impact, because when we're thinking about impact, we're thinking about what works, but we're also thinking about what didn't, and we're thinking about where it didn't quite work for us, or there's more learning to do. And I think perhaps we have been previously a little reticent in talking about that, because there's perhaps the perception that for funders that seems like we got it wrong, or that we aren't trustworthy. And I think we come back again to that question of trust and how that is changing at the moment for the better. But I feel like to be sharing those things and showing how they are informing our work and how we've created these feedback loops around our impact with the people that we work with will be really, really valuable as part of communicating, what we're doing. Michaela, thoughts on changes to your case for support?
I think this year really pushed us to reevaluate our case for support. I think it was something we were looking to do anyway, but it was sort of that strategic stop that made us really look at our audiences and how we sort of connect with them. And I think it also really pushed the trustees to be a bit more involved and more senior SMT. It was just really pushed everything fast forward. But our biggest change, looking at our artistic and our community work, which generally has been sort of delivered in these two strands, and having a look at that and seeing that there's a much bigger strength in delivering it as one. We do professional theatre, and a lot of the professional theatre we do has actors with experience of homelessness, and it almost seems strange not to deliver it together. And we are going to deliver a big piece of work this year, we're hoping to, and in that we are going to combine both work and with the possibility under sort of a theme that combines it, and see I've written a lot of applications about it, and sort of that change in strategic focus has been quite interesting. And then because of that, going to funders with that ask, instead of maybe just generally asking for our workshop program, our education work, but sort of going for a much more strategic new way of working has been very interesting. And it's all really been growing out of theory of change and just really understanding audiences, which I just don't think we really fully stopped and did prior. But I don't know, I'm not too sure, have other organisations also sort of seen and felt that pressure to change? Because we definitely have.
Sounds like that change has been really beneficial, or that pressure to reevaluate that is really positive, and that it's fantastic to have that more precise focus on exactly who you can help and how now, because as you say, and as Emily mentioned before, I think we're moving away from that model of funders doing these sort of supporting innovative new projects all the time, when actually they want to support organizations that have a really clear sense of mission and of their audience, of their participants in your instance. So I think that's a really valuable thing to be reflecting in your case for support. Emily, would you like to come in there with how yours has changed?
Yes. Ours has been similar, but also we're in the weird position where this year we had been working towards this new strategy anyway. So somewhat serendipitously, it was something we were looking at already. And our case for support is very much the combination of our participation work and our artistic work, rather than having them kind of siloed. And previously, you know, the artistic work was always reflected in the participation work. We'd use the same repertoire and things like that. But because we have the same musicians working on both sides of the program, we don't have a separate group of education musicians. It means that the things that they're learning, the improvisation skills, the connecting with audience members and that sense of co-creation is something that's really feeding into our artistic program. And that's, definitely the applications I've been doing recently have been more on that, you know, look at this as a whole rather than fund this particular participation project. So it's, the same sort of challenge where you're trying to articulate a lot of things in one application, but under the umbrella of, you know, this is what our organization does and this is our mission statement and this is the groups we're working with and how we're doing it. But character counts do get you on that one, so that's a real challenge.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you. I'm just aware that we're going to be moving quickly to taking questions from other people really shortly, so just a quick heads up to anybody in the chat to send them to us. Have we got time for one more question from me, Caroline, or should we go to... Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you.
Absolutely, Tash, go ahead.
Sure. So I guess I wanted to ask maybe a bigger question to you all around the ways in which, in light of all these shifting priorities, are there ways in which we as trust fundraisers can influence learning and change across our organisations? And I think I was really interested to see from the Trust Summit a couple of weeks ago an exercise which asked trust fundraisers to consider their top fundraising achievements that have nothing to do with raising money. And I think that maybe for us, one of those can be about how we influence change within our organisations. And I wondered what your experiences of that have been and whether that was possible. Michaela, can I come to you?
Sure. I think, again, influenced by the COVID-19, being the only staff member forced others in other departments to start fundraising. And I think that was one of the best achievements. In a funny way, having my producer call me up and say, why does it say 50 words when I can't even put 46 in? Like, having that realization of the frustration that we go through and just really understanding a bit more about the process has really helped in the organization. And it's really got a better buy-in and people understanding why we need information when we ask for it, why we're asking these annoying questions, why we want to know some of the really odd questions that we get asked when writing an application. Having someone like, why would you ask me that? And I'm like, well, welcome to fundraising. And that's actually been one of the positive changes, I think, in the organisation, just having a lot, you know, so much SMT just step in and take the burdens and get trust applications and, you know, be really successful. I think also getting trustees, we've always, you know, we've had a good relationship with trustees, but I think this year they really have sort of stepped forward a bit more and stepped more into a role and sort of taken a bit more accountability in our strategic focus, but also in fundraising and stepping up and making those connections with trusts that we knew they had. And also now being prepared to stand by our corporate and our corporate individuals development manager who will be doing events in the future and sort of stand by and look into how they can support with that and sort of be willing to do that. And I think both of those sort of really great influence and, bringing those two have just really helped shape our organisation going forward.
That's fantastic. And I'm so glad that there's more recognition of maybe how you're working and what we need to be doing as trust fundraisers amongst colleagues and across the organisation, because I think both in terms of recognition of all your hard work, but also how better to work together. That's amazing. Bhavisha, can I bring you in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything Michaela was saying, and internal advocacy has always been key for trust fundraisers. But one of the things that I've really noticed, so I was off on maternity leave and came back in October. So for me, the whole world had changed while I wasn't looking. And I came back, and obviously I hadn't been doing this whole working from home thing. And actually what I found has been really, really great is the way that now the whole organisation are working in a completely different way. It actually is way more collaborative, way more open. We're using Microsoft Teams, and the Teams channels gives us a wealth of information that is shared between the more members across the organisation than just staying within Teams. And there are less gatekeepers, there are less meetings that you have to have, because actually you can find the information. And I feel like that's been a real seismic shift for an organisation like Opera North, 42 years old and lots of established ways of working and team members that have been with us for a very long time. The trust's work has been happening. There was one individual who was with the organisation for 24 years before I started, and so processes have been quite entrenched, and all of a sudden it's actually become a lot easier. And I think it's really collaborative, and marketing, external affairs, the community team, they really understand what development need, and we understand the way that they're working, and having that shared understanding that yes, we have a process as trust fundraisers, and perhaps that process isn't the same as the creative process, but it isn't any more important than the creative process. Actually, the onus sometimes falls on us to extract the impact that is absolutely there in a project. It's just being articulated in a different way. Often I found that our creative teams are articulating and seeing the impact in the physical work, and we're just having to turn that into words. And I think that's been made much easier by moving to a digital way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a creative role. As you say, it's about articulating something really beautifully and in a really compelling way, and that's going to be even more crucial for us to do right in the months to come. Emily, thoughts on ways that we can have an impact across our organisations?
I don't think I have anything else to add. No, that's covered everything. But
perfect. Okay, well,
absolutely.
This might be a good moment for us to take some questions if we have them.
Absolutely, and perhaps I can start with you with this first one, Emily, which I've got two questions here which are on a similar topic, so I'm going to roll them together. And it's really about, we've all talked a little bit, and what a fascinating discussion, all three of you. Thank you so much, just completely, really insightful. We're talking a little bit about trust and foundations and how they're really helping us drive the change in the agenda in terms of whether it's COVID, Black Lives Matter, the environment, etc. But the questions that have come in are really about, are the trust and foundations walking that walk themselves yet enough? So, for example, are there still barriers in terms of application processes, particularly for smaller organisations? We're thinking here perhaps about less resource groups, but also perhaps disabled or neurodiverse-led groups. And then on the other side, the other really interesting question that's come in is about whether the funders themselves have yet got enough representation in terms of diverse groups on their own boards, and whether they can really change until they have that. Emily, do you mind going first on that one? It's quite a biggie.
Sure. I definitely have seen more applications when I've gone to download forms or whatever, have had notes about who to contact if you have any accessibility questions. I could not say definitively how helpful anyone is once you contact them, but it's definitely something that I've noticed a lot on application pages. And also people recently with the emergency funding, a lot of people would give, say, 3 weeks notice that the fund was going to open and give you the questions in advance, which certainly helped me with my anxiety levels of having a very short window to apply to something, and websites crashing and just general anxiety disorder. So that was great for me. I don't know about any other accessibility things. And I have, what was the other question about diversity?
It was really about their representation and whether they can really sort of walk the walk until they've got that. It's interesting, isn't it, when so many of the foundations have had trustees, as someone mentioned, that have been there for a very long time, etc. Whether they need to think about that themselves as well.
I think definitely need to think about it. I couldn't say whether they have done anything about it yet. I mean, I know from our organisation, we're recruiting for new board members to increase diversity on the board, but that is a slow process. So I feel like transparency from funders about what they're doing and the actual concrete steps they're taking, rather than just a "this is our mission" statement, would be great. I would rather someone say, "I don't have all the answers, but these are the steps that we have taken to this point. These are steps we're taking in the next 3 months."
Yeah, great point. Pavisha, do you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I think it's a difficult one because, as Emily mentioned, for arts organisations and charities in general, we are slowly taking steps towards having more equity and diversity on boards. But trusts can often still seem like faceless organisations. You know, some trusts are really transparent and open, and yet so many trusts don't have their own websites, and we can't readily access information. You know, many are still giving out funding to organisations that they have great relationships with and are close. So it's a bit of a minefield, and I do feel like it can be a barrier, and you don't always know who you're talking to because it is a bit faceless. I don't know how other organisations find it, but often, you know, as a development team, we extend invitations when it was opening nights and things, but often trusts contacts were the least engaged for lots of different reasons. You know, they're spread out throughout the country. Our work is in the north. But I think trusts could do a little bit more. And it would be really great to understand and hear from trusts, because often our access points are through directories and aren't even with the trusts themselves. And I'd really just like, I think it'd be really quite empowering for them to stand up and say, actually, here we are, this is what we want to talk about. And it's absolutely valid for them to feel like they can spend a little bit of their money operating their trust in a transparent way. I don't think they're doing it for like kind of not wanting to, but they probably feel like that money's better spent in a grant. But actually, it might not reach the right people if they themselves and the trust are hesitant towards advertising it in the way or bringing it up to speed with some of the other trusts.
Yeah, I think there's some great points. And actually, in the recent Art Audiences Money conference at Achates Foundation staged last month, David Hall talked a little bit about the fact that actually there has been quite a substantial growth in foundations that fund the arts. It's just that they're largely family-based, so they're quite invisible. And again, this issue of the networks and the links and how smaller organisations that are often doing the trailblazing work reach those is really interesting, isn't it? Michaela, anything you want to add into that one?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. So I'm dyslexic myself, so I find app forms incredibly difficult, and I get a little bit frustrated sometimes at the lack of accessibility I've talked about. But so I've been sort of watching this, and something really interests me. So I do think there is change happening, and I think these are being led by the bigger ones like Paul Hamlin Foundation, ESME. There is a talk about making it more accessible, the processes. I'm very sure PHF has said they're taking calls now, where they're doing like a small sort of survey before you apply, like more verbally, to make it a bit more easier. I think there's more conversations like this happening, and through these conversations, people are sharing it. So Stuart Hobley, from Limbury, basically was saying that they don't have application forms because they think it makes it very difficult for anyone to be able to communicate. You know, it takes the voices away from the communities. And I thought that was incredibly interesting. And, you know, he's saying that in front of other trusts, you can hear that. I do think a lot of the smaller ones, there is a way to go. And I think it will have to be paved by those bigger trusts coming first and changing the processes now. I think we can support this change. So, you know, websites like 360 Giving are really helping that sort of thing. And there was a trust website where you can review the application process and how easy you find everything. And also recently, I know a survey was circulated about how just accessibility of online forms and the idea of let's try and make this easier. So I think those conversations are happening and the change is coming. I think it's not going to happen overnight, unfortunately. And with diversity, they'll always need to be better. I think it's so hard, and I think everyone is listening now, and I'm really, I'm proud to be an arts fundraiser and be part of a sector which I do think, as a sector, we are leading on this. I think we are doing better than a lot of other sectors are across, if you look wider in companies. Oh,
no, absolutely, Michaela. I think you're right to be proud, and just hearing all of you talk today makes me absolutely feel the same. And it's very interesting, isn't it? Stuart Hobley was formerly the London director of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, so to have him reject forms is a victory, I think. Absolutely. For all trust fundraisers everywhere. Absolutely. I'm going to quickly go for one more question, but I'm going to ask you to answer very quickly, if I may. It's from Dale Copley, who's over in Cambridge Arts Centre, and he said that as plans have changed quickly, has anyone else had to find money for projects at short notice? How have you reconciled the short-term nature of business planning with the longer-term nature of trusts? Don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that one. Go on.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things that we've done in that respect is trial and start some programs very quickly on a very small scale. So at the point where we might only have sort of even 3 participants in one of our programs, because we are putting the money up front to really test and trial something before we can see where we might then prospect and fund that for a longer term program. So that's one of the things that we've been able to move on very, very quickly because we've kept it really small.
Great. Anybody else, Michaela?
I feel like I've always had to fundraise very quickly for projects, and we're actually doing the opposite now. I feel a bit where we're forced to plan a bit more, which has been great for me. But I think I don't know, very similar. I found there's been very quick turnaround times for a lot of funds out there, sort of 2-week turnaround times, and it has been very stressful, and I really hope that's something we don't continue to see within the sector, and a longer leading for anything is always appreciated.
Absolutely. Emily, last word from you.
I feel like we had almost the opposite problem because we had all this multi-year funding for projects that we suddenly couldn't do. So I don't actually know that I have anything to add.
No, that's brilliant. And I think really that just leaves me to thank you all for a really brilliant and thought-provoking session today. Thank you, Pavisha Kakade-Moran, Trust and Foundation Manager at Opera North. Been great to have you with us. Michaela Clayton, Development Manager at Cardboard Citizens, and Emily Lloyd, Development Manager at City of London Symphonia. And of course, our very own Tash Blore for another brilliant session. We're going to be taking an extra long break in January, but we're going to be back with our next session in February, and we'll be in touch with more information about that soon, as well as circulating the link to the Achates Philanthropy Foundation Art Audiences Money Conference that I know many of you did join us for, but there's some great sessions. So if you haven't already seen them, do take a look. That's going to be live on YouTube in a few days. So as you approach the break and the end of the most challenging year many of us have ever known, we'd like to encourage you to all reflect on what it is you're trying to do as a charity, the role you've played in your communities, and how we can collaborate and build on that going forwards. Congratulations to you all on what you've achieved this year. So take care, have a well-deserved rest, and here's to a better year ahead. Goodbye.